Today the shortcrust pastry is going to be made with 200 grams of flour, that's plain soft flour, and that's sieved into a bowl, and then added to that would be half the amount of fat. So the ratio or proportions are half fat to flour, or, if that's easier for you to remember, or 2 to 1, 2 of flour to 1 of fat. Okay, so it's really important. You actually don't need to remember a recipe once you remember your proportions. Now, if I was making a quiche or pasties, I would start off with 200 grams of flour and then use 100 grams of fat. If I was going to make, say, jam tarts, I would start off with half that. So I'd go for 100 grams of flour and 50 grams of fat. Now the fat can be all block butter or margarine, or it could actually be half white block fat like lard or a vegetable equivalent. Okay, so that's the flour sieved. To that I'm adding a tiny pinch of salt. Okay, you don't have to add the salt. And for the butter, it's best to, and fat, so you can see I've combined the two, and I'm going to break that up so it's easier to rub it in. Okay, because it's going to be easier to rub it in as smaller chunks than it is as large lumps. Okay, so add that to the flour. The fat needs to be cold from the fridge. The secret with shortcrust pastry is to use cold utensils and cold ingredients, so the fat is chilled, refrigerated. Okay, so using your hands, you take your thumb across the fingertips and rub the fat into the flour. So break it up, so that you've cut it up, you break it up and rub the fat into the flour until it resembles breadcrumbs. During this process, it's really important that you have cold hands. If you have a tendency to have warm hands, you know you've got warm hands, I suggest you run a cold tap over the back of your wrist. That causes the blood vessels to constrict back and it cools your hands down, and that helps then to make more successful pastry. If you use cold, hard fat from the fridge, so it needs to be firm and cold. Using a tub butter, something spreadable, is not going to work. It will turn too oily too quickly. And if you over rub the fat into the flour, you can then cause the fat to become oily, which is something that you definitely need to avoid. So you're rubbing that fat into the flour. If you notice my hands, it's the fingertips doing all of the work, and the palms are free of anything, because the palms of your hands are the warmest part. Lift it up, okay, turn the bowl, lift up, rub in, okay, thumb across fingertips, and just keep it moving. Okay, so what we're trying to do here is coat the flour with the flour grains with fat, so in order to stop the water from making the protein in the flour develop into really long strands. Okay, because you want to shorten them, and that's the shortening effect of the fat. So the fat surrounds, the fat globules, the fat molecules, they surround the flour particles, and that stops too much water getting to the protein to form gluten in the dough as you make it, because you want a crumbly dough. Shortcrust pastry is short meaning crumbly, so you want it really crumbly. Okay, so this is the process that you're using. Thumb across fingertips, and you are coating the flour with fat as you work, keeping everything cold. You do not want to over rub. If it starts to come together as a lump of dough, you've gone too far and it's over rubbed. So you have to be really careful. Okay, so keep going until it all resembles breadcrumbs. So while you're rubbing in, shake the bowl every so often. That brings the larger lumps to the surface so that you can break those down. Sometimes they're clusters of dry ingredients, but otherwise you just sort of shush it up, give it a shake around, see if there's any larger lumps. You're looking for larger lumps of fat on the surface rather than clumps of breadcrumbs. Okay, once you get to this point, Okay, so you've got it like breadcrumbs. So it resembles breadcrumbs. You then add the water. Now, the rule with water is add it slowly, add it gradually, and don't add too much. And the water guides within recipes they're exactly that, they're guides. So the suggestion for shortcrust pastry is that it's 25 mils added per 100 grams of flour. So 5 teaspoons initially in a well in the middle. Okay, use the palette knife to mix it with. Just keep cutting and stirring. And the important thing here is that all the utensils that you use are cold as well. Okay, and then we'll add a bit more. So that takes us to our 50 mils, 25 per 100 grams of flour. Now, you can add it slower than this, okay, especially when you're getting towards the end and you can see it forming a dough. Now, the absorbency of your flour is going to be very much hinged upon the atmospheric conditions that you're working in. So on cold, wet days, you might find that on moist, humid days that you have less water to add because the absorbency is that much greater. On a dry day, really warm, hot day, you'd need to add a lot more, okay? And it depends upon the heating. If you're in a house that's well heated, that would dry the conditions out again, and that will affect the absorbency of your flour. So I think we've just gone over by about 3 or 4 teaspoons now, and it's just about coming together, okay? You cut through, you can see whether it's going to start coming together. So add a bit more. Okay. And what you don't want to do is add too much, okay? Because if you over rub your fat, you'll end up with a really awkward dough to deal with and to handle. If you add too much liquid, you're going to end up in a similar position, okay? So you can see that that's coming together quite nicely now. So at this point, I'm going to put my fingers in. Just use my fingertips to pull it together, see if it's going to come. It still seems a little bit dry, so I'm going to just break that up a little bit more again. And another 2 teaspoons should do it. Okay. So once you get to this point, you can use your fingers. My palms of my hands are quite clean, because it might look like I'm grabbing it by the palm of the hand, but I'm not. I'm actually using my fingers to push the dough against the side of the bowl in order to pull it together, okay? I think it needs a tiny, tiny, tiny dribble more, just to pull it together nicely, okay? And that will form a nice dough. Now you should be able to use the dough itself to clean the inside of the bowl. Pull the dough round the bowl and pull it together. Okay, and that's your shortcrust pastry made. At this point, you would let it relax in the fridge, because the secret to pastry not shrinking is to actually allow it to relax back from all the handling. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap it and freeze it and use it another time. Come back and turn it into, say, a quiche or some pasties or tartlets, okay? So that basically you can make pastry like this and just freeze it, have it ready, or put it in the fridge and use it another day. So I've just dusted that with flour to stop it from sticking to everything. I'm going to put it in a bag, okay? So we want to put it in a food bag. And when you're putting it, if you're going to store it, what you need to do is to then just put that in the food bag like so. Seal it, squidge out all the air, okay? Use a twister on it, and put the date. Put what it is, so label it with Shortcrust Pastry and the date that you made it, okay? And then pop that either in the fridge, that will keep in the fridge for 2 to 3 days and allow you to make something with it later, or divide it up and make it into several things across the week. Or you can freeze it and then defrost it at, in the fridge overnight before you want to use it, and it would keep for a month, 2 months in the freezer. Okay.